is Ivan Ezquerra-Romano, co-founder of the popular website Drugs and Me, which he founded while studying at UCL. The website was designed to help provide students with actionable harm reduction advice. Ivan will be discussing the origin story of Drugs and Me, as well as its future in exciting new projects that seek to bridge the gap between digital harm reduction and pleasure management. Ivan's talk will also explore what drug memes are and how they can guide safer substance use behaviors. In tandem with this, he will also be speaking about recent research insights that his team has uncovered from surveying UK university student populations during the pandemic. Please give a warm welcome to Ivan.
Hey, well, thanks for the intro, and thanks for organizing the entire conference and this day. So I'm gonna start by sharing my screen, and you can let me know if something's not working well. But yeah, actually, so before I start, I want to also give thanks to Fiona for her presentation. Because my background is in neuroscience, and I'm doing a PhD in cognitive neuroscience. I still learned a lot from her presentation, and I found it very insightful. And actually, I want to advocate for her foundation because I know most of the audience is at university or beyond. But if you think that your school, the school that you went to, needs better drug education, which is very likely, then I want to encourage you to reach them out and suggest that Fiona's team delivers a talk or workshops, because just think how invaluable it will have been for the past you to learn better about drugs, to avoid some mistakes and the harms associated with them. So now I'm going to start with a story, which is fictional. So we're going to meet Irene's parents. So Irene's parents love drinking wine. And since she's little, they've had friends around for dinner and lunch over the weekends, and wine is always on the table when their friends are over. Irene grows in these fun and lovely gatherings, and they all look really happy, and as the bottle of wine empties, they speak louder and laugh more often. She knows that when the wine is finished, her parents and their friends start drinking water. They usually grab a taxi to get back home, or if they brought their own car, they will drive back after a few hours of finishing the wine. So Irene grows, and she decides to stay local for her university studies. And guess what? As Irene gets older and starts drinking wine too, she and her friends also get together over the weekends to enjoy nice food and wine. True, she does have a few nights in which, here and there, in which she drinks spirits and gets a bit more drunk than during the wine-fueled gatherings, but she's interiorized how to keep alcohol for special events and what to do to enjoy the highs and avoid the lows. Now, Irene has a little brother, Sam. So Sam decides to go abroad for university, and when he starts uni, he meets people with different cultures, attitudes, and manners. He's actually introduced to cannabis, and he had never seen anyone close to him, family or friends, consuming cannabis. In fact, he only knew about cannabis for a few negative reasons. So, just to put a few examples, some of the considered low-performing students at school smoke cannabis. He also had seen news in the telly of police seizing kilos and kilos of cannabis, and he had heard a few family members talking about it in a very negative way. So when he was first offered cannabis, he was a bit scared to try it, but then he actually ended up trying it, and he had a lot of fun, so he continued smoking cannabis. And a few months in, he found himself smoking cannabis every day for pretty much any reason. And at the same time, he started feeling a bit down, he had trouble sleeping, and he stopped doing many of the things he used to at home, like playing basketball. So these are completely fictional stories, and the aim is not to illustrate differences in drug-taking habits between siblings or sex. The aim is to talk about memes. So what are memes? So I don't think, I can see the chat here, but if you can maybe give it a try, like what do you think, how would you define what a meme is? Just like in a few words, can you try quickly? Okay. Yeah. I'm gonna echo some of the ideas that are easily spread. Picture with funny caption. anyone else wants to give it a try? Or are those like answers completely correct? Okay, pop culture jokes. Cool. Okay, so yeah, the first and the last are close to yeah, not that one, not the nuanced humor for Gen Z. So basically, the main message that, thank you for your answers. The main message I want to convey in these slides is that drug memes don't exist, and that's potentially very damaging for people like Sam and for society as a whole. But yes, okay, you're right. Alcohol is a drug, so drug memes do actually exist for some drugs in some cultural contexts. But let's all get on the same page about what a meme is, so this makes a bit more sense to everyone. So the very first thing that we all picture when we hear the word meme is, as one of the answers that you gave, as like one of these funny images. But a meme is a term that was coined by the scientist Richard Dawkins. And in a nutshell, a meme is an idea, behavior, or practice that is common in a social group and that is inherited by future generations. So we can think of a meme as a cultural unit, and they share characteristics that are analogous to genes. So both genes and memes replicate, survive, and mutate. And obviously the mechanisms by which they replicate, survive, and mutate are completely different. So let's talk about the meme mechanisms. So they replicate because we copy each other's behaviors. They survive because they're copied, and also they are copied by future generations. And then they mutate because these copies are never 100% identical. Variations are introduced. And to get a bit more into the Darwinian technical terms, these memes as genes have different fitness. So that means that they are more or less suited to different environments. So how does this link to drugs? So okay, so these memes, these cultural practices, they have a protective role. And what I would argue is that prohibition and social stigma has disrupted the replication, survival, and mutation of drug-related memes. Just think of Sam. Like he didn't have a chance to learn any behaviors or like protective practices surrounding the use of cannabis. But this is a fictional example. So I'm gonna give two non-fictional examples. So the first is about alcohol and native societies in America. So before Europeans arrived, alcohol was highly restricted in many societies. So it will only be consumed for ceremonies or like for very particular things. Or alcohol was not even a thing. It was not even like consumed by many societies. So when Europeans arrived to the land that is now the United States, many of these communities didn't have alcohol, and it turned out that after the two societies like clashed, the incidence of alcohol addiction in Native American societies increased, and it was very, very high. And there are two reasons, both the native themselves and experts argue that two reasons explain this increase in alcohol addiction. One is that many of their own cultural practices were erased. And the second is actually that because they hadn't been exposed to alcohol, they didn't have this cultural baggage that helps and protects you and to develop healthy relationship with alcohol. And now I'm going to give an example that could be considered that goes in the opposite direction, and it's cocaine and non-South American countries. So the plant from which we extract cocaine has been grown and used by South American societies for centuries, and they've developed these cultural practices and these behaviors to make the relationship with the plant healthy and even useful in many cases. So we know that like they use it to ameliorate the symptoms of altitude sickness, but to be honest, they use it like tea. They drink cocaine leaves like tea. But then Europeans arrived, and yeah, they discovered this plant and the effects that it has. And because of prohibition, social stigma, and also the lack of past with this plant, we've never been able to develop healthy cultural practices that like help us avoid the negative effects of consuming cocaine. So there's a lot to take in. So what I want to do in the next slide is to tease apart some of the problems associated with the absence of well-established drug-related memes. So, okay, so a meme is a cultural unit that is copied, so it's passed from one person to another. So the receiver of the meme goes through a learning process, right? And there are two important things in this learning process, or the way the learning process looks in the meme transfer. So it's repetition and hierarchy. So let's go back to the story and talk about Irene. So basically, Irene learned about these like alcohol related practices by repetition. So as she grew up, she saw her parents like years after years consuming alcohol in a specific way, and thus it means that it's more likely for her to interiorize these practices. So there are years and years of reinforcement, and when there's a well-established meme. And obviously a disclaimer here, like parentheses, I'm not saying that all the practices that we see in adults or like our parents in particular are optimal, but because of the hierarchy point that I'm going to talk about it, they're more likely to be optimal. So we have this hierarchy in the meme transfer. That means that we receive memes from individuals that have been engaged with risky, with any, well, not risky, but in this case, risky behaviors in terms of drug taking. Those individuals, they've been practicing those behaviors for years, and they've had the opportunity to adapt the practice with optimal features. And if we now contrast this with Sam, so for him, like, he was exposed to cannabis for the first time at uni, and he hadn't had the opportunity to get these years of reinforcement. So it was really up to his circumstances as an individual to develop healthy behaviors towards cannabis. And then also there was no hierarchy, so he probably started consuming cannabis with his friends, to become friends, and they were probably people that were also they may have been taking cannabis for a few months or years, but for sure not as for long as his parents. So it's less likely it's less likely that the behaviors that he sees have embraced optimal strategies, right? So we don't have these protective practices for many psychoactive substances. So what do we do? So, well, we've got organizations like Drugs and Me, Fiona's Foundation, The Loop, Drug Science, and others that are trying to fill this gap by doing research, policy, and education work. I've been asked to talk about Drugs and Me and my personal story. But before that, I want to introduce a framework and some data that is behind the way we approach recreational drug use, and also it's behind many of the decisions that we're taking and that will shape the future of the organization. So the first question, I think the most important question that is like, why taking drugs at all? And Fiona touched on these points a bit, and I want to emphasize on the purpose. So in a typical harm reduction session with in a school or like universities, we will talk about 4 very broad theoretical like purposes. So it's important to understand that psychoactive drugs are drugs that change the way we perceive, behave, make decisions, and we call them recreational drugs because we take them for leisure purposes, right? Then, for instance, cannabis can be taken recreationally, but we know in the news it's like coming up a lot, the recreational versus medicinal. So many psychoactive drugs can be also used for medicinal purposes. And the next purpose is the most common one, but is the one that people talk, I think, the least about, at least in harm reduction, and it's performance enhancing. Because the reason why I say is the most common one is because the psychoactive drug that is taken, that is the most common around the world, is caffeine, which is the psychoactive compound in coffee. People take coffee to stay alert, wake up, improve their concentration. And there's also like harm reduction behind drinking coffee. I'll talk about harm reduction in a bit. And then the last one, which I think is the least common, at least in my culture, is the spiritual purpose. So these are like broad, a bit like theoretical purposes. So some of the work we've done in the past years is to understand better these motivations. So a few years ago, we conducted this big survey that was led by Arda and Edward, and this was done in one university in the north of England, and it's one of the biggest surveys that have been done in one university about drugs. So we asked, like, the question was something about like, what are the reasons that motivate your drug taking, and we were careful about how we define drugs and recreational drugs, psychoactive drugs there. So yeah, most people surprisingly said that they took drugs for fun. And you can see like there are like positive reasons that are at the top of the ranking. And then only around like between 25 and 10% you start seeing reasons that are not so desirable, like taking drugs for to cope with mental health issues, to cope with stress, to escape reality because of peer pressure. And these we've compared these with other surveys that have been done at national level, and we've done these questions before in a non-pandemic world. And yeah, these are kind of the numbers, like between 10 and 25% of the people that respond to these surveys claim that they're taking drugs for these or similar negative reasons. So now it's really hard to not talk about COVID now. So we've Drugs.me conducted a very similar survey in April last year when the pandemic was like unfolding. And these literally everyone at Drugs.me was involved in this survey, but I want to highlight the work of Esther, Arthur, Maddie. And what's concerning, basically, what's important about this survey is that it was international, so we had like over 2,000 responses, but here I'm only showing the sample size is low because it's only students. So most people that filled the survey were not students. But to compare it with the previous one, I've only selected students. So, and what's concerning is how the so-called negative reasons are much, much higher than in the previous survey. And obviously there are certain limitations when we compare them. But yeah, you can see that to cope with boredom is really high. Stress also super high. Like generally all the negative reasons are high. So then Arda, who's leading Nearside, the consultancy like sibling that we have, I'll talk about that in a bit, did a survey in December, and it was only for UK university students. They asked a very similar question. So the difference with the previous question is that this graph is only the reasons for people to take illicit drugs either most days or every day. And you can see that the 5 like top reasons are not desirable ones. But I guess bear in mind that this is like people that are taking drugs most days or every day. So I guess the take-home message is here is like the motivations are important, and like most people take drugs for fun, but the context and matters a lot, and I will come back to that when I talk a bit more about harm reduction, because we can't understand the drug experiences if we don't take into account the individual and the context. So now, why have we done this? So I'm gonna talk a bit about like my personal story and like the story behind Drugs.me, So it all started like a side project, and it's still a side project, but it feels more like an ecosystem, and there is a lot of great people involved, contributing and doing different things. So I'm gonna start with my like personal story. So after finishing high school, I started psychology in Spain. I did 1 year, but then I came to UCL, and I did an MSci, so it's like 3 years of undergraduate studies plus a master's. And drugs to me became part of my life this summer between first and second year. So there are three main reasons that I always say motivated these like projects. So one is that I attended a talk by David Nutt, organized by the UCL Neuroscience Society, and I found it fascinating. Then, as a neuroscience student, in my lectures we learned pharmacology, we talked about drugs in different ways. So that was also like it like pushed me to learn more about psychoactive drugs in general. And I also read David Nutt's book at that time, and then also some difficult drug experiences. So basically all these like knowledge and experiences and make me think, oh, there's something that can be done here to improve how people develop relationship with drugs. So I guess the most important factor is that I met Pablo. So he was doing pharmacology at the time at UCL, and he had been working with Gabriel. So Pablo is from Spain as well, but we met at UCL, and they had actually already bought the domain for Drugs to Me, and they had like done a liter survey, but it was still very early days. They had lots of energy, and when I met Pablo at one of the UCL Entrepreneur Society events, we found out that we shared interests, passions, and he told me about Drugs to Me, and then we got together and we started working on the content. And Gabriel was doing computer science at the time, so he started writing the code for the website. And then I'm gonna like fast forward to fourth year, because then I'm gonna talk about the Drugs to Me story. But lots of things happened between this summer and what I'm gonna talk about. So then, thanks to my involvement in Drugs to Me, because we met Valerie Coran and like Will Lon. So basically I did my third year project, literature review on ketamine, and how it's we think it can be used to treat addiction, and he ended up being published in this special issue on psychedelics in neuropharmacology. And then in my fourth year I actually did some like hardcore neuroscience. I did use some like advanced methods on mice to read the activity of this brain region, and it's actually a brain region that is involved in reinforcement learning, and is highly connected. If you were at Fiona's talk, there's a lot of connectivity with the amygdala and all these like limbic system. Then what happened later? So then so the summer between like fourth year and the beginning of my PhD, instead of enjoying my last summer as a student, I spent most of it working on a consultancy branch out from Drugs to Me, because we started receiving emails from unions and other organizations. I was like, how do we talk about drugs? Well, like, we've got these problems, like what do we do with them? So it became clear that we could help, because Drugs to Me the focus is users, but it became clear that we could help organizations in different ways. So alcohol it stands for Alcohol and Other Drugs Education Consultancy, but it was recently rebranded to Neurosite, and that's some of the surveys and data that I've shown. And now my full-time occupation is a PhD in the Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience at UCL. So that's about me in the last like 6 years. But then what about Drugs to Me? So I was actually, when I was like trying to build this timeline, which the separation between the years is not great, but basically before we launched the website, we actually created a Twitter account in October 2015. And I remember I didn't have my own Twitter account, and I've never had my Instagram account. So yeah, I've never really used social media for my personal life. So it was a bit of a learning curve, but it was quite fun. So we started posting and like following other organizations and learning from them. And in parallel, Pablo and I worked on the content, and Gabriel built the website. So in February, we launched the first version of Drugs Me. And then, the first thing we did is just social media networking. We started just posting things, trying to spread the word about this new project. And then, so to be honest, the first website looked quite bad. So we came across this designer, and she had made some viral posters about drugs. And I don't know how we ended up like talking to her, and she really believed in the cause and resonated with us being students and the whole project. So she was like, I can help you make it look a bit better. So she made some pretty designs, and then Gabriel coded it. So we launched Drugs Me again. And the thing that then Pablo and I focused on was to get some academic support, and that's why so we met David Nutt. We've met him a few times after that, and the drug science team. And we also met Valerie Curran and her team, and that's why I ended up working with Will on this ketamine thing, because Valerie, Will, and Celia Morgan are behind a clinical trial in the UK that's used ketamine to treat alcohol addiction. So that's why I read loads of papers and wrote a literature review on ketamine. So then, we started like receiving welcoming volunteers, and I guess one of the things, because Pablo and I are not native speakers, so Arthur did a great job making the text sound better. We had, I think Miran is around, who did neuroscience with me. He joined a bit later, but he's been writing content, and like the focus been writing awareness, writing more content, and social media posts. Then, so we actually registered as a social enterprise when we realized that we could help organizations in a more formal way. And that summer I worked on ADDIC, and we had the first consultancy project, which so the first figure that I showed comes from that project. We had more consultancy projects with work with schools around the world, with unis in the UK, with the nightlife industry, and recently we've started working with the government as well. So during that period, Arthur led the content and social media work, and we've got Julia and Lydia behind the social media accounts, and they've been doing a great job getting more, spreading the word. And then COVID came, so we had to survive somehow. And I guess for Drugs Me, it was easy to survive because since the beginning we've been remote. Like a little anecdote. So I met Pablo at the end of my first year, but I didn't meet Gabriel in person until the following summer. So we used to work remotely. I guess the challenge was because our attention was diverted to make sure that our full-time occupations were working fine, and also that our mental health was okay. It was more challenging for for the addict to survive, and we actually so we conducted the survey, Drugs Me survey, the COVID-19 one. That was quite fun, and hopefully we've made some interesting content for people. Then, so ADDIC was rebranded to Neurosite. It was a good moment to do that from our perspective. And we managed to deliver some online workshops, although we were about to grow a lot, but most of the projects were put on hold, and now we're slowly getting back on track. We've also, during the last year, we're pivoting and rebuilding Drugs Me, and you will see why in the next, you will see what's the new approach, hopefully at the end of the talk. The future, so Neurosite was the thing we've been doing is, Arda did this survey, and then we've run a few webinars, and the focus is to acquire clients to help organizations improve the way they deal with drug-related issues and make the project financially viable, because Arda is trying to make it her full-time job. So the future for Drugsome is to launch the new website and the new digital tools that we've been working on. So that's a bit the story. So what are the like philosophical pillars of Drugsome? So I guess the main pillar is harm reduction, right? I've mentioned today is about harm reduction, and Fiona talked about harm reduction a bit, and I think luckily the slides that the concepts that I'm going to present are complementary to what Fiona talked about. So what's harm reduction? Let's just start with a simple definition so we're all on the same page. It's a set of practical strategies and ideas aimed at reducing negative consequences associated with drug use. So the idea is that you acknowledge that people consume substances and you treat them with respect and create like empathy and trust when you talk to people that can make their own decisions, and you're honest and practical because you can't censor our behaviors, but you can help people to make more informed decisions. So it is realistic in a way, and it's quite hard to evidence that it works for many reasons. Some practical, like funders are not interested in putting money on it, like governments don't want to put money, but also it's quite like it's like a big social topic. It's quite hard to measure different things, but there are some examples. This one is one I really like. It's quite qualitative, but if you're interested in harm reduction and want to learn more about like I don't know, the nerdy stuff, you can check this paper. And there is also some good work by Fiona Meashan at the Loop that was trying to evidence that harm reduction works, and it doesn't encourage drug use, and it ends up saving lives and reducing the harm overall. So we could talk for ages about like all the drugs, the psychoactive drugs that are taken recreationally, and there are so like so many, like some of them like affect you differently, and yeah, that could be like an entire day or an entire degree. That's why some people study pharmacology. But there's this very useful tool that is called the drug wheel that I really want to like tell you about today, because it helps reducing the complexity. And Fiona mentioned this in her talk, and she mentioned all the neurotransmitters that are involved, and it can get very, very complex very quickly. But this drug wheel, which is freely available online, and it's not ours, but it's been I couldn't like mention the author right now, but it's been adapted by many organizations, and you can check it online. There are many variants, even like translations for other languages, and etc. So the idea is that you can categorize the drugs in 7 categories, and if you know, so imagine like someone comes to you and they want to know, what are harm reduction strategies to minimize the harms associated with consuming X drug. Well, you may not know that drug, but if you know a bit of each category, and you go onto the internet and you say like, okay, alcohol is a depressant, and I know a bit about alcohol, so I can tell you something. So yeah, let's just go quickly through them. But so depressants, alcohol is the most known and consumed one, I think. There, basically, they act on GABA receptors. And the idea is that they increase inhibition in the nervous system. That means that some functions are inhibited, but other functions that are usually inhibited become like more. Because they reduce. It's called disinhibition. So basically, you reduce inhibition, and things that are usually inhibited are not inhibited anymore. So that's could be in a very like simplistic way why we say some things that we wouldn't say, because we don't have like the inhibition there. So some effects are like basically clumsiness, laughter as positive one. I don't know. Yeah, you are hopefully familiar, or you might be familiar with alcohol. So I'm not gonna get into more details. Then we've got opioids. So I guess the known ones are heroin and morphine, which is basically the same. So the idea is that they are somehow, in terms of the effects, they're somehow similar to depressants in the sense that they make you slurries. People that are on opioids are clumsy. They also may laugh a bit more. But I guess the pharmacology is quite different. So they act on the opioid system. Then stimulants. So as the name suggests, they if we're gonna contrast with depressants on opioids, they excite you, and the effects are enthusiasm, euphoria, energism, and then I don't know, dry mouth is a negative one, I guess. You can get to maybe overconfident. So those stimulants and pathogens. MDMA is the most known one, and as the name suggests, I guess the most characteristic effect is that they increase empathy, and there's a lot of cool work there. Psychedelics. So I think many of the talks you've had have been on psychedelics, so I'm not gonna talk much about that. Then dissociatives. Ketamine is the most known. In a way, they've got similar effects to depressants and opioids, in the sense that they seem to slow down and people look a bit clumsy and disconnected, but they're different because so they affect different systems. So they primarily act on NMDA receptors, which is the glutamatergic system in the nervous system, but basically is the one that actually transmits excitatory information between neurons. So what happens is that the reason why they're called dissociatives is because there is actually kind of like a dissociation between the external inputs that you get and the what's going on in your brain. But I could talk about ketamine for ages. So let's move on to cannabinoids, which is quite self-explanatory. You find cannabis, but many others there. So if you want to know more about the drug wheel, I think it's useful to I don't know, whatever you're doing, definitely go just type drug wheel on the internet and you'll find it and you'll find more information. But it's a really useful tool for harm reduction work. And what's really important, and I mentioned this when I talked about COVID, is that many times in harm reduction we focus on the drug itself, and so the drug wheel does a really good job on reducing the complexity of the many drugs that there are. But then you can't understand a drug experience without taking into account other factors, and this is academically known as the Simberg's model. So these psychoanalysts and psychiatrists argue that you can't understand drug use, and the effects are the outcomes of the drug experience, unless you take into account the interrelationship of the following factors. So one is the drug, then it's also the environment, which in the psychedelic community is commonly known as the setting, and then the individual, which is the set. And the idea is that the drug experience lies at the center of these three dimensions, and you can only understand how someone feels, the outcomes and all that, if you take everything into account. And there are some really interesting studies that show how this is the case. So I'm gonna talk about one. Basically, there was one experiment in which they just got a group of people and in different groups, and to one group they gave them alcohol with ethanol, and they were this alcohol doesn't have, it's fake alcohol, it doesn't have any alcohol, although it had. And then they were you have to drink it and then just go partying. So they drank it and they went partying, and then they did surveys, etc. But in a nutshell, they were they didn't really feel drunk, and they were if you compare these to nights in which you drank legit alcohol, they were no, it was not as fun, I didn't feel drunk, but they actually drank alcohol. So then in another group, they gave them a liquid, and they told them this is alcohol and it has ethanol, but it didn't have ethanol. And they went out, and then they did the survey the next day, the following day, and the reports were more positive. They felt it was very fun, I felt drunk, although there was no ethanol. So this example, it's like a very simple one that shows how the drug is not the most important thing, or not, it's not the only thing to take into account when talking about drugs. So these are all these like a flash talk, crash course on harm reduction concepts, and these are all concepts that we and other people in the harm reduction community use to work, to talk about drugs, to deal with different drug-related situations, to know what to do in emergencies. We also, in like workshops and talks, we talk about this to students, staff that's going to interact with people that may be on drugs, etc. So they're like really useful concepts. It's a like toolkit that we have to talk about drugs without encouraging them, and to make sure that we can provide the knowledge to make more informed decisions. But there is something about the term harm reduction and how we frame some things that I've been unhappy with like for a few years now. And it all started when we conducted this survey, and we surprisingly found that most people take drugs for fun. So obviously I knew that people take psychoactive drugs recreationally for fun, which is a redundancy, but yeah, it was not until we did this that I was like, okay, there is something that there is some like dissonance here. So then obviously I went to the literature, read more, we conducted more surveys, and I think Fiona mentioned some data that I had come across with. It was like basically why do teenagers start taking drugs? And I guess you can extrapolate these to other ages, but basically teenagers start taking drugs because they're curious and they want to live new experiences. So all these studies that we did, surveys and other surveys, and like studies and like literature point towards like all these like positive concepts and like positive like ideas about taking drugs. And so they are fun. People take drugs with friends to celebrate, to party. Drugs can enhance experiences like sex and music. They can help us relax. And usually people have very good and long-lasting memories in which drugs were a key component, right? Okay, but we can't forget that taking drugs is so trading and consuming drugs is illegal for many of them. They can be lethal and they are harmful, but it's important there to understand that they are not lethal and harmful because they are intrinsically evil, and like they will just run they will run and like just impinge harm on you. I think I will argue that one of the main reasons is that we don't have these memes that protect us and help us develop healthy, sustainable relationship with drugs, and that's why we've got harm reduction and different organizations. So, and then there's also a huge social stigma. But still, okay, this is really important. We should all keep it in mind. But you may know already, or if you probably knew it implicitly, and now it's becoming more explicitly. But I want to make it more explicit. Basically, that drug use is not either addiction or abstinence, because it seems from many sources that there are only two poles, right? We've got addiction and abstinence, and many abstinents will probably consume drugs recreationally, but they're illegal, so that's fine. We've got the majority of people are actually within, and we've got people that, even though they're perfectly functional and can live like fulfilling lives, they might have like certain features of their relationships with drugs are problematic. So, and these usually with like humans, we are bad at seeing the long-term effects. So it could be that in the short term, these behaviors are not so problematic, but if you continue that problematic use, then the harm will compound, and in the long term it will be problematic and harmful. But then there's a lot of people that have like a sustainable relationship with drugs, and they have like also like perfectly functional, fulfilling lives. So let's just go back to the story that I introduced at the beginning. So it's Irene and Sam. Basically, we could consider that Irene is in this like sustainable range, and Sam is somewhere here in the problematic range. And to link this with Drugs.me and harm reduction and make it more visual, I guess what Drugs.me tries is to provide the knowledge and the tools to help people that are in the problematic range to realize, become aware of this, and help them go towards the sustainable range. And this is like from the Drugs.me perspective, and I think as a field, I hope, and as a society, I hope like we can soon shift from talking only about harm reduction, and we can start talking about pleasure and harm management. And yeah, we could discuss this, and there are many reasons why we don't talk about pleasure implicitly, but I think so this is not a new idea. Like the concept of pleasure management is implicit in harm reduction, because as I mentioned, it's supposed to be honest and realistic, so you acknowledge that people take drugs for perfectly valid reasons, but you help them reduce the harms. But I guess the key there is that you reject judgmental approaches to pleasures. And this comes back to, I guess, a philosophy in Epicurus. So he's been I think misunderstood in many ways, because so he like founded hedonism, which said that, or argues that management of pleasures and deliberate reduction of harms is the way to maximize joy and minimize suffering in our lives. And this is called ataraxia. And I guess because like the idea is that one of the things we want is to be happy, and he would argue that this is the way, and this is behind the harm reduction philosophy. But I think we're increasingly, at least from the Drugs.me perspective, and I think from the social and legal perspective, we're increasingly we're becoming closer to a point in which we should make explicit the pleasure management side, because it will make harm reduction even more realistic. And like there are certain ways and certain like things that, well, we need to frame it in certain ways, or that I guess we censor ourselves, that we shouldn't do, because it should be, the pleasure side should be explicit when we talk about drugs. And I guess what we're hopefully moving towards these way of framing things, and because the idea is that we want to be happy and enjoy the pleasures as much as we can, minimize the risks, and many times enjoying the pleasures as much as we can means not enjoying them as much in the moment, because life is a marathon. So I guess Drugs.me, it's trying to work on that through research, and we're very excited about the digital tools that we're building. Hopefully that will help anyone that's thinking or consumes psychoactive substances to develop a sustainable relationship with drugs and make it as fun as possible. So that's what I had to say. And thank you for listening. I'm happy to answer questions now. But thank you.
Great. Could we all give a very good big thanks to Ivan, and thank you for the talk. Please do put questions in the comments. I will read them out. But beforehand, I just like to ask. So what does the future for Drugs.me look like at the moment?
So I guess we're doing a few things, because I guess from the technical, from the tech side, so we've got like a team of 4 developers, including myself, trying to make more interactive, useful tools. So just to put an example, we've got a table that is the interaction table, like Drugs.me, and like throughout the years is like the main feature. There's a feature that people like the most. It means it's an interactive table in which you can like select different drugs, and it will tell you. It's basically inspired by the TripSit interaction table that is huge, but this makes it digital and interactive. That tool, everyone like really likes it. So we see that we should make more of those because they're really valuable, and like I guess we're looking for ways of displaying information in useful and relevant ways for people who are thinking of taking drugs. We're working on a project that it's basically going to provide personalized pleasure and harm management advice. It's called Dr. High, and I've had to learn app development myself, but I've got like Amir, Ishan, and Lex, who are developers themselves, working on it, and will hopefully. And Andre is also working on it, but he's not a developer. He's working more on the. He's working on more on the concept side and message side. That's. I guess we're still developing it, so I'm not sure how much more I can talk about. But I guess that's more the tech side. I'm from the harm reduction side. I guess some of the ideas that I mentioned in the talk hopefully will. So we want to move from right now we've got drugs and me, and if you go to the website you can go to the drugs and like get harm reduction information, and then you've got me, which is supposed to be the set, right, the individual. But we've got a bias towards the drugs, and we want to make more content for that is me related, and also place related, so setting related. And that's and hopefully we can talk a bit more about pleasures in a more relaxed and honest way. So those are the two main things.
I got a question here. How do we start creating more protective drug memes?
Yeah, I guess. Wait, where's my? How do we start? Yeah, I guess. Oh, like the legal. Yeah, well, it's like a multi-level approach, and like you need like many different efforts. So you've got the policy side. You've got a lot of like organizations like Wolfers and others advocating for legal changes. So that will be a very like top-down approach to help society develop their own memes. Like in many ways, like organizations like us, we're trying to somehow embed and like promote these behaviors. But if we didn't have legal and social barriers, these practices will develop naturally. So I guess if you remove the legal barriers, then the social barriers will also be easier to overcome, and people will be allowed to develop their own. But I guess also another thing is research. I think research can help like shape these memes. Like obviously, it's a very like top down. It's also top down. Like you learn, and then these like knowledge that you gain somehow trickle down society. So I guess like research and education, those three pillars. So I guess like Neuroside categorizes our services in like three. So it's policy, research, and education. And we try to do like we help organizations with services that fall in one of those three categories. Those three things I think can help society as a whole develop memes.
Brilliant. Right. We've got a question from Karen. In countries which are predominantly conservative, do you think social media is a good tool? And how to improve the outreach?
So what would be an example of a conservative country?
Let's say Saudi Arabia.
Okay. Social media is a good tool. I guess it's a bit tricky because I guess social media and like the internet as a whole has helped distribute messages worldwide, and like you can many times overcome the like messages that wouldn't reach people in certain countries can reach them because of the internet, and social media is part of the internet. So that can be.
All right. Yeah, she said by conservative, I mean being accused of wanting to drug youths by giving information. As in, so being informed on drug policy implies that you are corrupting the youths, that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah. So. Okay. Yeah. I think it's a double-edged sword, because like, okay, the first point is like, okay, it can be good, like social media, like getting the message through to people is good. Like people can learn about new approaches, new perspectives, but then it's important to take into account, like I've mentioned these like memes and the cultural baggage of like each society, and like that should be taken into account. And I guess the problem there is that certain behaviors that are not optimal for a particular society are copied by certain communities, and like those societies might not be ready to or might not even need those like cultural practices or the knowledge. So I think so I wouldn't say social media is like the best tool. I think like learning about others and how they do it, and trying to integrate these in the particular like context of each society is what needs to be done. Because like, if you just copy it might just be like a new way of colonialism, right? And just like copying like certain cultural practices. I don't think that's what we should do.
I'm sure in some ways social media can probably disinform just as much as it informs. Yeah, in a lot of ways. Right, we've got a question from Louisa here. Do you get much criticism for not being more damning of drug use?
So can you help me understand what damning means?
Oh, right, as in, so like because of they're like you're being pretty liberal with it, that sort of thing. Like, yeah.
So we don't get it. I guess like we don't get it from the people that follow us, because I guess the people that follow us already are share some of our mindset and like ideas. But since I'm in like second year, I've tried to get universities. I've tried to, in particular UCL, I've tried to, I guess is what you guys are trying to do to get university, because they have a duty of care over their students, and they should like open up and talk about these things. So I've been told by staff at university that I should stop doing what I'm doing because it's illegal, and that I'm doing like something wrong, and I should stop doing it. I've also been, we've tried to unsuccessfully get funding for different reasons, and Pablo and I were suggested in a meeting that we should be careful to fund our enterprise with dubious illegal activities, so implying that we were selling drugs. I guess that's the criticism we've received. I guess, as I think it's similar, it's kind of like a parallel to one of the things Fiona mentioned. Like usually you get a lot of organizations are the ones that like put barriers and that critique you. Like when you go and talk to individuals, you then receive like those critics, and it's not so it's less aggressive. You get so that was my answer.
Have you actually got into any proper trouble as a result of it, or just like...
Wait, you could, I don't know if can you repeat what you said, because I didn't get everything. I'm not sure, is it my internet connection or?
Oh yeah, sorry. Oh yeah, mine's going a bit jumpy as well. Okay, can you see me? Yeah.
So if I got into any trouble, no. Almost.
Yeah, as in, no.
Almost.
Not legally, yeah.
So basically, no. But I've been told. So, I didn't talk about this survey, but we did like a small survey, Arda and I, and like third year, I think. So like 4 years ago, and basically I was trying to get ethical approval, like to make it a bit more robust and get some like experts involved. And I was so I approached someone in the psychopharmacology department. I approached him, and then after that email, he literally copied in all my my tutors and the people that organized my degree, just saying, like, he just copied everyone in, and he was like, yeah, please, you should stop doing this, like, be really careful what you're doing. Just like out of the blue, he like copied everyone in. I was like, why would you do this? So, but there was no trouble. Like, that was quite a bit scary. Then I had actually a meeting with one of my tutors, and she was like perfectly reasonable and supported me. But yeah, that's I guess the major trouble. So
Yeah, that sounds pretty scary in some ways, just like having everyone know about it in that sense. But yeah, yes, we've got a question from Joe. Where do you stand on drug legalization?
yeah, so I guess what my answer would be any system that helps us reducing the harms and that managing the pleasures better. I'm up for it. So yeah, that's as much as I want to say.
Fair enough. Yeah. On a similar topic, is there like, I don't know, a particular drug which you would assume is like, I don't know, some drugs which will never be legalized and some which will in the near future, or next 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the policy person, but I guess from what I read and the conversations I have with people that know more about this, it seems like cannabis will be the first one to be legally legalized worldwide, and then I think that the other is gonna be more regional, so it's gonna depend a lot on like the culture, on like what they've been, what's like more common in their culture. So I don't know, to put an example, I guess hopefully you get South American countries legalizing cocaine, and making like well, I think I'm answering the previous question now, but you might get like hopefully you get like them creating systems that don't create this context in which is quite it's quite criminals are like, yeah. So I think cocaine in South America, cannabis first, and all, like in the future, I don't know, it's gonna come through the medicinal route, for sure, for many. And I guess the more medicinal a drug is seen, I think the more likely it will be to also be legalized for recreational purposes.
Nice. Thank you very much, Ivan. That was an excellent top quality. Yes, for everyone else who is staying tuned, please come back for our next lecture at 6. And also we've got a digital pub quiz going on at 8 p.m. But again, yes, thank you very much, Ivan. It's been a real pleasure having you.
Thank you, guys. I'll see you later.